Hello everyone and welcome to WiBit Boiled Down. Every so often I like to look into something unfamiliar like a new technology or how candy corn is made, whatever. But what frustrates me to no end is when information doesn't just cut to the chase. So I'd like to boil the frog down for you and just present the wonderful soup. This isn't intended to teach you why technology exists or how it's applicable to various scenarios, but just a simple, clear, no noise demonstration of how to get up and running in the most minimal way possible for some sort of technology. So with that said, let's take a look at Mongo Trasho. So what I want to show you is how to take Node.js, which is a executor for JavaScript, and connect to a Mongo DB database. So a Mongo DB database is something that's not with SQL. It's usually called a NoSQL database, and you just take a JSON object and literally store it into a collection and then retrieve it later when you want. So I'm not going to get into all the details of what those are, and I'm assuming that if you're curious you'll go look it up, or you're watching this because you've already heard of them or are aware of them and just kind of want to get down to the chase and figure out, okay, that's great, I want to check it out, how do we get up and running? So as quickly as possible, I just want to show you all the steps necessary to get up and running. So the two prerequisites is that we install the latest version of Node.js and the latest version of Mongo DB. So I'll install those two things now. First with Node.js. And we'll just install it to the default folder with all the default options. Click install and voila! Node is installed. Alright, next we want to install MongoDB, and I'm essentially going to do the same thing where we just install this with the default options. We'll choose the typical option, click install, and poof, MongoDB is installed. Alright, so that's both installed just with default options, nothing special, nothing fancy. And now we'll just jump right into Mongo Trasho for all you hippie degenerate shrimpers. So now let's set up a project. So I made a folder here on the desktop called Mongo Trasho, and this is going to be our project directory. So inside of here we'll make two folders, one called source and one called data. So source is going to hold the source code, like the JavaScript files and the package.js, which we'll talk about in a minute. And data is essentially our database instance. So unlike SQL Server, where you'd go into SQL Server Management Studio and create an instance and set permissions and things, it's really just a folder in the file system. And once we direct Mongo to it, it will just write the data there. Simple as that. Now in the source folder, we're going to create two files, just two plain old text files. The first one is going to be the main JavaScript file, which we'll call app.js, JS for JavaScript. And the second file we're going to create is the package.json. So first, let's take a look at the package.json. So we're going to open this up in Notepad++. So the package.json is really just, if you're familiar with Java and Maven, it's a little like the build process or the build declaration for the project, or the .project file, or sometimes it's like those types of things where you define the name of the project, the version of the project, dependencies. So we're going to create just the simplest version of the package.json that we can for just running a Node JavaScript application. And all that means is it just calls JavaScript like just like any other program. So we created a JSON object with the curly braces like you normally would, and the first attribute is going to be name, and we're going to call our project Mongo Trasho. And then the second is going to be the version, and this version number is 0.0.1, let's just say. And we'll set private to true, since this won't really be a project that's inherited. And then scripts is basically just identifying where our JavaScript files are for the project. And the script on start, which is the start parameter, is going to be node space ./app. And so what that means is wherever node was called from, go to that root directory that you're currently in and look for a JavaScript file called app. And in our case, that's the app.js file. So now that we have that together, let's jump over to the app.js file, and we'll just do a really simple hey buddy. So we open up our app.js, and the simplest way to do that in any Node.js is just the V8 engine from Chrome. stripped out of Chrome and just run on its own. So just like any other browser, you have access to console. So we can call console.log and hey buddy. Alright, so we're just going to use that to write the standard out. So done. That's all we have to do to get Node.js side of the fence running. So to run this project, we're going to just open up a command prompt, cmd, and then we'll go to the desktop, and then to our Mongo Trasho project folder. And then in our source folder, we just call Node to tell it to start running the project in that location. So Node comes with something called Node Package Manager, or NPM. And when Node was installed, this should have been added as a path variable in Windows, so it's accessible from any directory in the command prompt. So if we call npm start, it's going to look for the package.json file, look to load the scripts, and then consequently load the app.js script, realize that this is the one to use on start since we defined it under the start property. And we run it, and it blows up because of end. And as we see, we get an error. Now the reason for this error is when I downloaded the default version of Node.js, I downloaded a 64-bit. I'm running it on a 32-bit computer. So this is a good example of sometimes you just run into weird things when you're trying to get things up and running. And the bottom line is it was expecting this npm, this Node Package Manager directory, to exist in the roaming profile. That's not applicable in a 64-bit system. So to get around that issue, you just simply create the folder npm, and if you don't have this issue, then you probably have the right bit version for your OS, and it's no problem. So we call npm start with the directory created now this time, and we see that we printed to the console once the app kicked. So we see that the project started. It started from the source directory. It called the root app file, which is app.js, and wrote, hey buddy, to the screen. So cool. So it looks like we got the Node.js piece up and running, and we have that kicking. So now the next piece is to kind of start thinking about connecting to Mongo DB. So to get the database connected, we have to start up a Mongo database server instance. So to start up a server instance, we'll go to the command prompt, and we'll just navigate over to where it was installed, which is in Program Files, Mongo DB Standard, and we'll go to the bin directory. And inside the bin directory, it's mongod.exe. And MongoD is the main database instance. So when we start this, we could run this as a service, and it would run just like SQL Server. And so for here, we'll just kick it in the command line, and we can see what the output looks like. So what this wants is it wants where we should be running this data store from. So we want to set the DB path to wherever we set that data directory. So if we come back to our folder here, and we go up to data, we go up here, and we copy the path, and we switch back over to here, we'll just paste the path to the data directory that we created as the DB path. And that's really all that it needs to know that, when we're running, all the data that I'm going to read and write to and from is going to come from this data directory. So here we go, we're up and running, and then you see in the data directory we already created this MongoD lock file and a journal folder and some other stuff. You see temp files being created and local.ns files. So that's kind of doing its thing. So we've got Node.js running, and it's waiting for connections on port 27017. So that means we're basically up and running on the Mongo side. So I'm just going to minimize that, and we know that that's running. So now we want to connect to it from Node.js, and then we want to just fetch and store data. So now let's go to the package.json and pull in some dependencies that we need for loading the driver to connect to the Mongo database. So here we have dependencies, and this is literally going to connect to the internet and download anything we need for these packages. So Mongo DB is the native database driver, and star means just get the latest version. Then we want Mongo.js, which is a JavaScript wrapper around the native drivers to make them a little more straightforward to use. Then bson is the next one we want. So bson is just like JSON, and it's what Mongo stores as the actual JSON object type in its database. And really the primary difference is that bson has an object ID and a mechanism for handling object IDs in the JSON object. So it's basically like JSON, but it's called bson, and it has some other stuff in there. So now that we have these dependencies, we can use require.js for module management. In JavaScript, there are no classes per se, and all the code execution happens on the same long process execution. So unlike C# or Java, where you have natural classes and modularity, JavaScript needs a helping hand to be nice and broken up that way. So one way to consider this is by adding functions as object members and using functions to declare class constructors with prototypes to explore expose those public methods. Doesn't really matter. The long story short is that require.js will help us say things like, we want this library and we're going to import it into this object. So for instance, we could say stuff like variable m is equal to require Mongo.js. And that's basically how that goes. So in the package JSON, we're also going to add require to this dependencies list. Require may come with Node, so let's try that without the dependency. Okay, so here let's just kind of put it in action and see if we can just get this moving. So we'll create a variable called Mongo.js, and that's going to be calling require on Mongo.js, Mongo.js library. So that's going to reach out to the dependency, get the library, execute the JavaScript, and roll it back into an object instance and store it as JS, Mongo.js. Then we'll create a database variable, var db, and then we'll call the Mongo.js object as a function and say that the address that we're trying to connect to is localhost /WiBit. So local is the local instance that we were running in the command prompt. And now we're going to pass an array of collection names. And I'm just going to pass in animals as the collection name. We could do multiple collection names. We'll just do one for now. So what this is doing is it loads the Mongo.js dependency, and then we'll use it to create a database instance to connect to our local database. And then the WiBit at the end is the actual database instance for this particular project. And then the list of collection names. So let's write some function that will save an animal to the database. So we'll get rid of HeyBuddyConsole, and we'll create a function called function save animal. And we'll pass in name, default color, and a callback. And a callback is just a function passed in as a parameter that we'll execute at the end. So we'll go to the DB object, and then we'll do .animals, since that was loaded as one of the collections we passed in. .save, and then we'll open paren, and then pass in a JSON object. So we'll just say this JSON object has a name, which is the name that we passed in, and the color is the default color that we passed in. Looks good so far? Alright, so then at the end of save, there's a callback function that passes an error if one occurs, and the series of docs that were saved, which is the JSON docs. Okay, so when we come back, we want to call our callback, and that will kind of end the function, so to speak. So what we can say is if docs is not null, which means it exists, and the type of docs is not undefined, then we know that we got something. Otherwise, we didn't get anything. So in the else, we'll just say console.log could not save the animal. I'm so sorry. The animal did not make it. Okay, but if we did get it, we'll say console.log saved, and then we'll call json.stringify so that we can actually print out the contents of our object that comes back. So stringify docs. Okay, so now that we have these, let's call the function and we can actually see if this works. So this takes in two parameters, so save animal, and the first parameter is the name of the animal, we'll call it frog, and the next one will be green for the default color, and then function, which is the callback, and in the callback we'll just say console.log save complete. Alright, I think that looks good. So if we run this, we should actually see us connect to the database, save the animal, and get some output to the log saying that we saved the animal. So we go back up to our project folder, and we execute it again. And it looks like we have an error. Okay, so it looks like it can't find Mongo.js. So what we'll do is we'll try to say npm update and make sure that we're actually getting the latest and greatest from the Node package manager. Alright, now it looks like we downloaded some dependencies by calling node update. And now when we call node start, it looks like everything came through and the save completed. So if you call node start, it won't automatically attempt to try to find any missing modules that you have in the dependencies. So by calling npm update, it will go out and acquire those, download them for you, and then you can call start, and it'll use those dependencies. So cool. So it looks like it's saved the frog to the database, and you see this underscore ID with the ID. That's part of the bson object structure. And the save complete. So how do we know for sure that this actually saved to the database? Well, let's go take a look. So if we open up a new command prompt, and we go to the program files, Mongo, bin, there's another program in here just called Mongo.exe. And that will just naturally connect to test. So what we can do is we can call Mongo.exe and then just connect to localhost/WiBit, just like we did in the JavaScript. So now we're connecting to WiBit, and we're connected. And that threw a fit because switching gears between writing stuff in JavaScript and the command line gets a little weird. So you just have to make sure you have double quotes on that, not single quotes. That's what it was freaking out about. So it was actually trying to connect to quote-unquote localhost WiBit. Okay, so now it looks like we're connected. So if we say db.find, now find wants parameters, so we can say name frog like this, and then hit enter. And you can see that property find isn't found because we actually want to search animals.find. There we go. And you can see the frog comes right back. So we can see that we were able to, in JavaScript, establish a connection, save something, get it. Now we can call the same db.animals.find with a callback in JavaScript, and that'll get it back. You can do other things like db.animals.remove. And then the same filter works, so you can say name frog. So this will remove everything with the name frog. And you just pass it in like a JSON object. And then it's removed. We can find frogs. We see there isn't any more in the database. And then if we were to run this again, that reinserts the frog. Save complete. Then we find the frog's back in the database. So that was a very, very fast, very short, very quick way to install Node, establish a package from scratch just using Notepad++, getting some dependencies, using require to get Mongo.js, connect to a database that's running and run the database, create a function that can kind of help give you some information when saving stuff to the database, and then writing it out to the log. So I hope you liked this really quick, to the point, down and dirty, here's how to use Mongo and Node. And that's what I will call Mongo Trasho, because it was so easy that I can literally just close all this stuff down and delete it, because it was so easy to make again, although it's going to make me a liar. Alright, well, if Windows let me. There we go. Now it's gone. Thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day.